Welcome to the Slightly Greener Life podcast. This is your host, Tanya Harris. I am an award-winning environmental toxin expert, best-selling author, and mother of three. I created this podcast as a place to help busy moms ditch the overwhelm and start living a low-toxin life. Now, let's get into this week's episode. Welcome to episode 16 of the Slightly Greener Life. I am so glad you're here, and I can't wait to dig into this week's episode. And that's because of some of the amazing feedback I've gotten from the Safer Sunscreen series I did a few weeks back. And I really appreciate the kind words. And the questions, too. There were quite a few questions about kids and sunscreens. So I thought I would do another episode, this time concentrating on kids and sun safety. Because it really is a whole new ballgame when it comes to kids and sunscreens. Sunscreens shouldn't be used on babies under 6 months of age, for example. And a child's skin is different and doesn't have the same natural defense mechanisms built in like an adult has. And some sunscreens have ingredients like hormone disruptors, which are especially important to avoid in childhood when important body systems are developing. And if you listen to episodes 9 and 10 from the Safer Sunscreen series, you'll remember that I talked about hormone disrupting chemicals in sunscreen. And in episode 5, we discussed endocrine disruptors, also known as hormone disruptors, and why it is so important to avoid these chemicals, especially when it comes to our children. As a brief recap, a child's detoxification pathways are not as developed as an adult's, so the chemicals are not detoxified and flushed out as quickly, leaving the chemicals in the body for a longer period of time. And then a child's skin is also different than an adult's skin. It's still developing and it's extremely permeable, meaning that chemicals will pass through the skin at a faster rate. And then adding endocrine disrupting chemicals, again, also known as hormone disruptors, are found in many different sunscreens commonly found on store shelves, and even in safer mineral sunscreens. And these hormone disruptors can interfere with the development of body systems during vital times of growth and development. And a few of the health effects of hormone disruptors include possible reproductive issues, thyroid problems, increased cancer risk, and they can even affect a child's brain development. So be sure to listen to episode 5 if you haven't already to learn more about what these chemicals are, where they're found, and even more importantly, how to avoid them. And then let's go back to the issue with children's skin. Because children and babies both have skin that is different and, of course, less developed than an adult skin, making them more prone to not only sunburn, but rashes and irritation from product use with certain ingredients. And not only that, one study I ran across said that 80% of total sun exposure occurs in the first 18 years of life, and that studies show a higher incidence of melanoma in those with a history of sunburns during childhood and adolescence. And that same study said that the point of sun safety is not to avoid or prevent being outdoors, because we definitely don't want to do that to ourselves or our kids, but the point should be to protect the skin from the harmful effects of the sun. So for both children and adults, this includes doing things like protecting from excessive sun exposure and from sunburns, which may lead to future development of skin cancers. And the FDA advises that sunscreen should not be used on babies. Both the FDA and the American Academy of Pediatrics both recommend keeping babies under 6 months of age out of the sun completely. And that's because babies under 6 months old have a limited ability to produce melanin in the skin, which melanin is a pigment in the skin that helps provide a certain level of natural sun protection. And this limited ability makes a baby's skin more susceptible to sunburns and long-term skin damage, making them especially vulnerable to the sun's effects. So that's why it's best to keep infants under 6 months of age out of direct sunlight and to use shade as the best form of sun protection. So you can use things either like natural shade under a tree, or you can create your own using an umbrella or a stroller canopy, something like that. So it's also important to keep your baby out of the sun during peak sun hours, which, depending on where you live, can be anywhere from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. or even 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if you have to be outside during those times, make sure that you're able to find shade. And also make sure to dress your baby appropriately. The American Academy of Pediatrics suggests lightweight clothing like long pants and long sleeve shirts and a wide brimmed hat that shades the neck completely to prevent sunburn. So they say that baseball caps are not suitable because they don't protect sensitive areas like the neck and the ears. And in addition to being more vulnerable to the sun's rays, babies are also at risk of overheating and dehydration in hot weather because unlike adults, babies don't sweat as effectively to cool down. So it's important to keep them cool and hydrated. So here are the FDA's recommendations of sun safety tips for infants under 6 months old. The first one is to keep your baby in the shade as much as possible. The second one is to consult your pediatrician before using any sunscreen. And again, wouldn't do that until over 6 months old. The third one is to make sure your baby wears protective clothing that covers their sensitive skin. Number 4 is make sure your baby wears a hat that shades their face, neck, and ears. And the next one is watch for signs of sunburn or dehydration. And these signs include fussiness, redness, and excessive crying. And if your baby does get sunburned, move them out of the sun and apply cold compresses to the affected areas. And then make sure to consult your pediatrician right away for further advice. And the last one is to bring a cooler to store liquids and hydrate your baby with formula or breast milk frequently, even if you're out in the sun for just a few minutes or more. It really doesn't take long for them to get dehydrated. And don't worry about writing all of these tips down because you can find all of these tips on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 16. So now let's talk about when it comes to keeping kids safe in the sun. There are several things you can do here as well. So the first one is when it comes to choosing a sunscreen, I always recommend a mineral sunscreen. Back in episode 9, we talked about the 2 types of sunscreen and which is better. And chemical sunscreens are the ones that protect with the active ingredients like avobenzone, octinoxate, and homosalate, and octocrylene, just to name a common few. But they are under investigation by the FDA for safety and are linked with hormone-disrupting health effects. Mineral sunscreens are a better option. These are the ones that protect with the active ingredients zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And they are considered to be safer, but they're not recommended to be used in powdered form because of the inhalation risks. And these chemicals work to physically block the sun's rays and to scatter them away from the skin. So I don't think there's a perfect sunscreen because although mineral sunscreens are the safer option, they're also not completely without risk. And more studies need to be done to see if these active ingredients like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide are absorbed into the skin. But some of my favorite mineral sunscreen brands are All Good and Badger. And you can find more of my favorite brands, including a list of ingredients to avoid in sunscreens, on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 9. So when you do use a sunscreen on your child, be sure to apply it generously on all exposed skin. And this really goes for us too as adults. So make sure you get the ears, the nose, and the back of the neck, and reapply frequently, especially after swimming or sweating, because even waterproof sunscreen needs to be reapplied. In fact, most waterproof sunscreens only last about 40 minutes in the water, so they need to be applied more frequently than we think. And shade really is the best sun protection, but if you or your child needs to be outside in the sun for extended periods of time, also dress in lightweight, loose-fitting clothing that covers a lot of skin, like long-sleeve shirts, long pants, and wide-brim hats. It's also recommended to encourage children to wear sunglasses with UV protection to shield their eyes from harmful UV rays, because we don't always think about it, but our eyes can get affected too from the UV rays. So look for sunglasses that block 100% of UVA and UVB rays. And plan outdoor activities in the early morning or late afternoon if it's possible, when the sun's intensity is lower, because this reduces the risk of sunburn and any heat-related issues. Another important thing is to stay hydrated. Make sure the children stay hydrated by providing them with water regularly. Make sure it's always available, especially during outdoor activities that are in the heat and the sun. And another thing you can do is teach children to seek shade. So let them know that is something that they should be doing. And especially during peak sun hours, again, usually between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., when the sun's rays are the strongest. And you can also let children know about the importance of sun protection and teach them to develop these sun-safe habits, such as applying sunscreen or wearing protective clothing and seeking shade. And one of the best ways to do this is to lead by example, honestly, because most of the studies I read mentioned how important it is for us as adults to model these sun safety behaviors so that we can encourage children to do the same and they grow up just thinking it's a normal thing. And then I want to mention too, there's also a couple of sunscreen don'ts. these are going to be hard to hear, and I totally get that. So the first one is don't use sunscreen that's a combination of sunscreen and insect repellent. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that the FDA does not believe that these products should be classified as safe and effective because they can't be labeled properly to ensure their safe use, and they don't provide clear instructions. And that's due to conflicts between the FDA and EPA labeling requirements, because the FDA regulates the sunscreens and the EPA regulates the insect repellents. So it's kind of just conflicting. So it's hard to label them. The FDA has also stated that evidence suggests that combining certain active ingredients in sunscreen along with insect repellents in a combination product may not be safe because it may increase the absorption of DEET into the body. And the potential combined effects of the sunscreen active ingredients along with the insect repellent that contains DEET have not been adequately studied. And then this was kind of scary, but I found this study that was published in the Journal of American Dermatology, and they found that using sunscreen and DEET can decrease the effectiveness of sunscreen by over 30%. So not only do using these combination products decrease the SPF of the sunscreen, but they may also increase the absorption of DEET into the body. So that is not a great combo. And another complication is, as if I need to add another one, is that sunscreen needs to be reapplied every couple of hours. Again, more often if swimming or sweating. But insect repellent doesn't need to be reapplied as often. So it's for this reason that the CDC also does not recommend using these two in one product. And I thought it was interesting to see in some of these studies too that while the insect repellent does decrease the SPF of sunscreen, really doesn't reduce the effectiveness of insect repellent. So for this reason, again, the CDC recommends applying sunscreen first and then follow it with the insect repellent if you're going to use it. So I like to recommend waiting a full 15 minutes after you apply the sunscreen before you apply the insect repellent. And that's because that's the amount of time it typically takes for sunscreen to absorb into the skin and begin working. And then after that, you can apply the insect repellent. And of course, I always recommend using a safe and non-toxic bug spray, which I talk more about in my membership, which I'll link to below in the show notes. The second don't is, and you're going to be mad at me for this one, but don't use spray sunscreen. There's a few different reasons for this, but really it's too easy to miss spots. And especially if you're applying it on a breezy day and you're basically spraying into the air. I mean, you're wasting so much anyway, but that makes it really easy to miss a lot of spots on the body and not use enough, making it really easy for sunburns to occur. Plus, there are inhalation concerns, and that includes inhaling the propellants that are needed for the spray. And sometimes those can be toxic to the brain and nervous system. And some of the other ingredients shouldn't be inhaled either. Again, even if it's a mineral sunscreen, which is considered to be safer, I still don't recommend spray sunscreens. And again, there are inhalation risks with zinc oxide and titanium dioxide when they're inhaled. So these are just a few of the main reasons why spray sunscreens should not be used. So I realize that I'm telling you not to use two really convenient products that make the tedious task of applying sunscreen to little ones much easier. And I really remember those days well. And it might be one of the tasks that's actually harder than herding cats. But as you can see from the studies, the benefits of the combination bug repellent and sunscreen, or even just the spray sunscreen, don't outweigh the risks. But there are actually a couple other things I want to mention really quick too about using sunscreen correctly. And I have probably mentioned these before, but I thought it might be good to mention them again because there are definitely ways to use sunscreens wrong. So just as a brief recap of that also, one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is applying enough sunscreen and at the right times, because timing does make a difference when it comes to applying sunscreen. One of the things you can do is to apply more sunscreen than you think you need. And Consumer Reports recommends applying 1 teaspoon of sunscreen per area of the body. And the Skin Cancer Foundation recommends a nickel-size amount just for the face alone. And you want to apply it often, even if you're using a waterproof sunscreen. So sunscreens aren't meant to last all day. And most water-resistant sunscreens work for only 40 minutes in the water. So always be sure to reapply it after swimming or sweating, even if you're using water-resistant sunscreen. And always remember to towel off and dry skin completely before reapplying so it's not diluted. And then always apply it before you go out into the sun because sunscreens really take 15 minutes to absorb into the skin and be able to do its work. So make sure that you apply sunscreens about 15 minutes before heading outside or when you're getting that sun exposure. So with all that being said, there is something to be said for getting some safe sun exposure to get some vitamin D, but that's a whole nother topic. And I do talk about that more in my membership. But the reason I like to talk about sunscreen is that I feel like there are some sunscreens that may be doing more harm than good overall. So I really like to talk about what to look for in a safer sunscreen, especially when it comes to our kids. And sunscreen isn't always the answer. Some have ingredients that actually degrade when they're exposed to sunlight, and some sunscreens don't protect against both UVA and UVB rays, as you heard me mention in episode 9. So while I'm all for getting smaller amounts of sunlight in smaller increments, I think using a safer, non-toxic sunscreen is a really important topic. It's so easy to think that it's okay to be out in the sun for long periods of time because you have sunscreen on, especially if you have a higher SPF on. And that's typically not the case. But the safest form of sun protection is shade or sun protective clothing, because I'm not even 100% sure there is a perfect sunscreen, even in those that are generally considered to be safer. But especially, like I mentioned, when it comes to our kids and they are more susceptible and vulnerable to the health effects of a lot of these chemicals, I think it's really important that since most of us use a sunscreen anyway, that I help you be able to find a safe, non-toxic sunscreen that actually works. So I really hope that you found this info to be helpful, and I'd love to know what you think. So please rate and review this podcast if you do find the info helpful. And if you would like to discuss this episode with other listeners and get ideas for tips on safer sunscreens and other ideas for reducing toxic chemicals in your home, I'd love for you to join my free Facebook group, the Slightly Greener Community, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And speaking of rating and reviewing the podcast, if you do leave a review, be sure to screenshot it and make sure you're following me on social media. I'm Slightly Greener on both Facebook and Instagram. I'll be announcing a contest in the next episode and on social media for the next couple of weeks, where I'll be asking for those screenshots of those reviews, and you'll be entered for a chance to win some of my favorite non-toxic items. So be sure to stay tuned. And that's it for today. Thank you so much again for being here, and I'll see you next week. Are you tired of trying to figure out which ingredients are safe and which products are truly safer? The Slightly Greener membership is here to help you eliminate any guesswork. With an easy step-by-step process and a supportive community, you'll learn how to transition into a low-toxic lifestyle with just a few small changes at a time. This membership will provide you with the knowledge, tools, and support you need to keep your home looking and feeling healthy without turning your lifestyle upside down. You'll learn which ingredients to avoid and which brands are truly safer, so that your search for safe products becomes easy and automatic. Imagine being able to make simple swaps that significantly reduce toxins in your home without sacrificing convenience or comfort. No more hours of researching trying to find safe products, and no more guessing. I'll take the guesswork and hours of research off your plate, leaving you with more time to enjoy living a low-toxin lifestyle. Join the membership today and be free of worrying if your products may contain hidden toxic chemicals, or worse, greenwashed formulas that are marketed as all natural or eco-friendly that turn out to be anything but. So empower yourself with this knowledge so that you can keep your family safe while saving money, time, and your sanity. Find out more at slightlygreener.com/membership. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Slightly Greener Life podcast. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show, and then be sure to share it with a friend who you know wants simple steps to living in this complex world. I'll see you next time.